Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for calling this hearing. Agency use of guidance documents may not sound like the most riveting topic, but it is one of incredible, we're like the rules nerds, so, we get very excited about all these topics. But obviously, this is one of incredible importance and one that affects so many of our businesses and so many of our schools and pretty much the entire regulatory community. As I've said many times, regulations underpin almost everything our nation and our citizens do. Regulations keep our products and food safe. Regulations work to prevent fraud and keep our economy and the Americans working. However, sometimes the language agencies use creates confusing and seemingly conflicting standards. Guidance is the means by which businesses can get the clarity and answers they're searching for. It gives them certainty. Guidance removes ambiguity and helps clarify expectations. Guidance is a conduit for informational exchanges and a tool to streamline processes. Guidance allows businesses to better understand their relationship with the regulator. Guidance is not, nor should it be, substantive rulemaking. It is important to recognize that more often than not, guidance comes at the request of the regulated parties. Any work that we do here must not chill that exchange, for it's a valuable tool for both business and government. There is more to guidance than simply clarifying views and expectations. The creation of guidance must take into account the effects these documents will have on the affected parties. Although guidance cannot change laws, it has the power to influence markets. It is incredibly important that we ensure regulated entities are given an opportunity to voice their concerns, share data, and submit comments. In order for this to be a truly exceptional process, we must ensure that there are seats for all interested parties at the table, and that seat must be a real seat. However, there's a difference between having a seat at the table and getting one's own way. Many times agencies' hands are handcuffed and the Congress holds the key. Sometimes agencies simply do not have the authority to alter a regulation due to a statutory mandate. In these instances, it is up to Congress to be vigilant. It is up to everyone on this dais to ensure that we listen to agencies and we listen to businesses and we listen to those who are regulated. It is up to us to be willing to work together to tweak and amend legislation when necessary. And it is up to us to ensure that good intentions do not overly burden our economy. In reviewing the testimony and reports in preparation for this hearing, it seems that there is much we can do as a chamber to ensure that guidance published is of the highest quality. It's important that there is consistency across agencies. And as the chairman noted, although we have two agencies represented here, we aren't looking just at two agencies. We're looking at, and that's the role of this committee, to look more at a systemic view. However, these illustrations can in fact help inform us on the types of reforms that we may be advancing out of this committee. Small businesses don't always have the staff or the time to sift through pages and pages. In fact, I can guarantee you they do not have the staff or the time to sift through pages of confusing and dissimilar fact sheets. Administrator interpretations, directives, information memorandums, and program instructions spread across multiple websites and multiple pages. We need to work to make sure that guidance is accessible to the public. We need to ensure that one does not need to have intimate knowledge of the regulatory state to understand what is and what is not a guidance document. We need to simplify terms and create consistencies. We need to ensure that it is an inclusive system where impacted parties have a real voice. This is how we ensure positive outcomes moving forward. I look forward to examining this guidance process, look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and hopefully having a fairly lively debate on what we could all learn from these examples and move forward to amend the system when it isn't working. I know we'll get into more in depth on this, and on this particular guidance. I think the disturbing piece of this for so many people is we thought we were in compliance, no rule changed, now we get a letter saying we're not in compliance. Now it seems like the rule changed. And if we were in compliance before doing what we're doing, then how can we so dramatically be out of compliance right now? And I think you can understand, the confusion, because usually if that changes that dramatically, and it changes how you implement a law that dramatically, people might turn back and say, that seems to be something that should have been noticed or something that should have been handled by Congress, but to simply unilaterally, without comment or process, change the rules doesn't seem to be what a guidance should do. And I think that brings us to this discussion. But I want to maybe back away from these regulations a little bit and talk more about guidance. And I think, Ms. Sanger, obviously you had a chance to kind of look across to agencies and had a chance to kind of think about what these guidance documents ought to be and what they ought not to be. As you look at the growth, and I think there's a chart over there that shows you this informal process, where do you think we need to tweak or change either the OMB directive or take a look at legislating in this area? What recommendations would you make?
Thank you for the question, Senator Heitkamp. And the answer to this question is not a bright line, if you will, in part because guidance provides agencies with the kind of flexibility that we just heard about from all the witnesses. At the same time, if there is a bright line, to the extent there is one, it is that the guidance not be legally binding. Where the difficulty comes in is that as agencies are issuing guidance to explain their regulations, to the extent that the regulated parties are held accountable and then believe that those guidance documents go beyond the regulations, that's where the difficulty occurs. So in terms of next steps, I think there are a number available. One that we talked about in our report is making sure that agencies have the internal controls, the management controls in place to be very clear about the choices that they are making and who is signing off on those choices. Certainly additional oversight. Our report looked at these 4 agencies. We simply do not know the extent to which what we found at these 4 agencies is or is not consistent with other federal agencies. Mm-hmm. And then certainly another option could be looking at the OMB memo and perhaps codifying certain aspects of that memo to the extent it's appropriate government-wide. And again, that's where there is a
This
big
becomes
challenge.
the age-old definitional process, when the Supreme Court says, I know obscenity when I see it. Mm-hmm, I can't describe it for you, but I know it when I see it. And we all may have a different line in terms of where we think guidance may cross over to substantive rulemaking, but it makes it extraordinarily difficult. And one thing that I struggle with as a former tax regulator, I know the benefit of informal rulings. I know the benefit of a letter ruling in terms of creating certainty as a taxpayer moves forward, giving that taxpayer the ability to rely on a letter ruling so that they can, in fact, make economic decisions for their business. If we move too far to prohibit guidance or to too narrowly define guidance, we may be, in fact, acting against the best interest of the regulated entities who desperately need to have this information. And so, I think one of the problems that I've had reading and thinking about this issue coming to this has really been definitional. Mm-hmm. And everybody has a different line, and we're going to have to kind of navigate that. But one thing we don't want to have happen is for people's relationship with a regulated agency to materially change as a result of a guidance and dramatically shift. Because then we start thinking, that's not the right way to make that decision. This is probably something that needs a greater period of comment, more of a substantive rulemaking process. And so we're going to continue to kind of work through this, and I hope as the expert at GAO on this that we might be able to rely on the expertise of that agency as we think about definitional changes or we think about what might in fact be the right response to some of these concerns. And I want to follow up a little bit on Senator Alexander's kind of direction and maybe some of this direction. And maybe this is just a really simplistic way of looking at this. But it seems to me that we pass a statute that's binding. That's got the full force and effect of law. You go through a formal rulemaking process, full force and effect of the law. A guidance shouldn't hurt you, right? A guidance should only help you meet the requirements that are set out in the statute and in the substantive rule process. Where we're getting concerned here and what you're hearing is when guidance seems to hurt us. I mean, it should be instructive, it should be helpful in meeting the requirements, but we should know what those requirements are from both the statute and the substantive rulemaking. And when it seems like we cross that Rubicon, when we stop thinking that this is helpful in interpretation and it seems to change the interpretation, or it changes what has been known historically to be the traditional kind of regulatory environment that Senator Ernst talked about, then we start thinking that doesn't look like it's helpful, interpretive, help me get through the morass of regulation. This looks like it's a shortcut, right? Looks like it's a shortcut to changing the rule. And so I'm back, Ms. Sanger, to kind of, can you help me understand how we can make those delineations more certain? Because when somebody, and you had an exchange here, but when somebody at a very high level tells someone that an interpretive rule has a full force and effect of law, we aren't really communicating what an interpretive, or not an interpretive rule, but what a guidance is, right? I mean, we all agree, hopefully, here, that a guidance does not